Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A fun topic. Let's do it. Hey, Reddit, what's the strangest coincidence you've ever personally experienced? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. When I was 1 year old, we moved to a city some 500 kilometers away from where I was born. 15 years later, my father decided to put me in a boarding school in the area of that first city because he went there too. I got randomly put in a room with two other guys, and one of them is still my best friend, Toady. When I first visited this friend at his home, I discovered that he not only lives in the same city as we do, not much of a coincidence as it's the only major city in that area, but in the same effing house. Of course, I couldn't remember our old house, so I called my father to confirm that it was the same address, and it turns out that he very briefly knew my friend's family from selling the house. Last summer I went to New York with my family for a week. A friend of mine that I hadn't seen since she graduated from college was living and working in New York at the time, so we decided to meet up for drinks. As we were walking through Times Square at 11 p.m. on a Saturday, who did we see on the other side of the street but another friend of ours from college? I knew he had been living in New Jersey, but he was in New York for a grinder date. The three of us went to a bar and talked about life and how none of our friends live in Ireland anymore. They've all moved abroad. It was bittersweet and a crazy coincidence that the three friends from a small university in Dublin would serendipitously meet in New York City. Went to college, met a cute girl. Where'd you go to high school, she asks. You've never heard of it, I reply. I grew up in a town of 1,200 people and graduated in a class of about 90. Try me, she says. And that was the beginning of finding out that not only had she heard of it, she'd almost attended it because her family had lived in one of the neighboring towns very briefly when she was growing up. We shared dozens of mutual friends and had apparently spent our young lives narrowly missing each other. Later, after we started dating, we learned that one of our mutual friends had been trying to set us up with each other for years. She was overwhelmed with laughter when she saw that we were finally together, completely without her involvement. I asked her to marry me and she said yes. We went out to dinner with our parents so they could finally meet. Her folks arrive at the restaurant and see mine. Her mom goes, "Oh hey, my dad's name. So this is your son, huh?" They had been co-workers years ago. Of course. We've been married for 11 years now. Got a good thing going. We intend to keep it. Had recently moved cities and had a new local phone number. Had to make a lot of calls to various utilities, etc. to get everything all set up. I call one of them, am speaking with customer service rep, and all is going fine until she asks for my phone number. When I tell her, she starts freaking out on me. Who are you? How did you find me? How do you know that phone number? Kind of stuff. Eventually managed to get her to calm down to the point where we could figure out what was going on. It turned out she had been in an abusive relationship where her ex stalked and harassed her, including him and his friends, making threatening calls constantly. Eventually, she had moved to a different part of the city and taken a new unlisted phone number. My new phone number was her old one, and the moment I said it, she assumed he had tracked her down once again and the harassment campaign was about to begin anew. I'm not sure she truly believed me when I explained it all, but we eventually got through the phone call. In freshman physics, I became friends with the Japanese kid next to me. After a while, he was helping me with my Japanese homework. Did really well after that, by the way. But after that class, we kind of drifted apart. Fast forward 2 years where I'm an exchange student in Japan over the summer and doing some sightseeing in Kyoto after the program. I'm crossing the street in Kyoto, and I hear my name being called out. I look around and there he is. Thousands of miles apart we meet again. We had some drinks and good food together. It was a blast. No, his hometown was not Kyoto. He was also doing sightseeing while home for the summer. I don't know if this counts as a coincidence because it might be influenced by the commonalities between us, but I was reading through one of my dad's old journals and found out that he and I share the same reoccurring nightmare. The details are basically identical, even down to the frequency of it happening once a month. It's very trippy. I wanted my husband to accompany me down to the parking garage in our building to grab something from our car. He was already in his PJ pants and didn't want to come. I convinced him no one would see us, and he reluctantly agreed. We got on the elevator and rode down one floor before it stopped to let someone on. the largest, buffest man steps into the elevator wearing his own pajama pants. He said nothing, but gave my husband the dude head nod before getting off on the main floor and disappearing forever. Never seen him since. My favorites occurred during separate canoe trips. The first was during a Labor Day weekend trip up and down the St. Croix River, 2 days paddling upstream, 1 down, which runs between Wisconsin and Minnesota and eventually joins the Mississippi River. Despite it being a holiday weekend, there was virtually no traffic on the river, as we saw only one other boat, and that was one of the first days shortly after we left. On the second day out, the weather was quite warm. At one point I said, boy, a watermelon sure would be good right about now. My 3 companions told me to shut up and not even mention it, because we didn't have one and weren't going to find one in the wilderness. A little while later, we spotted a green object floating toward us that turned out to be a watermelon. Years later, I was on a river outing with several other people on the Whitewater River in Indiana. I was paddling my kayak and had just told the watermelon story to the people in the canoe next to me. It was a hot summer day, and someone said something to the effect of, watermelons are fine, but I could really go for a cold beer right now. A few minutes later, we paddled around a bend and saw a cooler sitting on a sandbar. We stopped on the sidewalk, opened the cooler, and found that it contained just enough cold beers for each of us to have one. Appalachian trail hikers refer to occurrences like this as trail magic. I guess it happens on rivers, too. I mean, at that point, keep the party rolling. Get back in the canoe and start paddling and be like, $1 million. $10 million. Let's ride this thing. When I was 18, I dated a girl who went to a private school. She told me they were having a dance, so I thought, okay, great. It'll be a nice night. She told me that only boys from a specific private school were allowed to come because of the incident once when they let everyone in. Some girls got really drunk and puked on the headmaster's shoes, so they limited it to one boys' school after that. Fast forward 12 years and I'm with my fiance, a different girl, at a wedding shower. I overhear my wife say, I was so embarrassed when I puked on the headmaster's shoes. I yelled, that was you? That's awesome. I love you even more now that you're famous. DL, DR. My wife cock-blocked me 12 years before we met. I knew a girl in high school who was just the worst type of person. It takes too long to explain all the reasons, but a big one is that she tried to drive a wedge between me and my bestie. She moved away after high school. My friend and I would bring her up occasionally and talk on some of her worst qualities and say how glad we were that we never had to see her again. One time, as we were doing so in a restaurant, suddenly she appeared right next to our table. She had come back to visit someone and just happened to be right where we were, right as we were discussing her. So awkward. It was 5 minutes of awkwardness, and then she left, and we just sat there like, "Defa?" I had a dream that me and my friend ran into Biggie Smalls. He was alive in the dream world, and he invited us to a party that was on that night. We decided that we were going to buy Biggie a gift, and I suggested that we get him a water dragon, big lizard, because Biggie would look dope rocking a water dragon on his shoulder. We started walking to the party with the lizard, and we were at the local park. I looked down next to a bench, and there was a snap-lock bag with white powder. We took the white powder and partied with Biggie that night. The next day I wake up and go to make coffee. I turn on the radio, and Party and Bullshit is playing. I thought it was a strange coincidence, considering I had a dream about Biggie, but thought nothing too much of it. I walk out and froze. On my porch was a water dragon. A water dragon might appear around my house maybe 2 or 3 times a year. I spoke to my mate later that day and told him about the dream and joked that I might find a bag of Coke later that day. Sure enough, I'm walking to my friend's house at night and humor the idea. So I walk over to the bench and find a bag of Coke exactly where I dreamt it would be. I definitely disposed of the bag though. Me and my friends definitely hypothetically did not snort the Coke while playing Biggie Saul songs all night and into the morning having the best times of our lives. That would be preposterous. When I was in university in Toronto, I was flying to England for a debating tournament. I booked my flight, then told my partner the date and time of the flight so he could book as well. The day before we left, we agreed to meet at a particular subway station and go to the end of the line to catch the bus to the airport. The next day, I go to the subway station at the agreed time, but he doesn't show up. Pre-cell phone day, so I can't call him. Eventually, I have to go. So I take the subway bus, get to the airport, go to the gate, but there's no sign of him. I have him paged over the loudspeaker, no result. I tell the story to the gate agent, who looks up the passenger list. He's not on it. Confused, I fly to London. I did find him the next day in London, which is another story all its own, almost as coincidental. It turned out that while I was on one level of the subway station, waiting to travel north to catch a bus to Terminal 1 at the airport for my flight, he was on the other level of the same station, waiting to travel west to catch a bus to Terminal 2 for his flight, which was at exactly the same time, on the same day, but on a different airline. At every step of the way, we had been describing identical routes, but without ever having an overlap. The Beagle story. Living in a small town in Texas at the time, we always took in dog rescues to help find homes for them. It got to the point that people would dump them in our backyard. One day, 4 dogs show up, 2 puppies, a brindle, and a beagle. We immediately get the puppies adopted out because they're young and cute. Fast forward 8 months, we've tried adopting out the beagle male twice. He's been returned to us. The brindle is an extremely tragic case, and I won't get into her, but she was the mother and the beagle was the father of the puppies. One fine Sunday, I decide that we need to swing by the volunteer-run animal shelter down the road from our house. It was a Sunday. 3 years I've driven past this place. 3 years I haven't ever been because the owner and I know each other from around town and I do not care for her. And today I wanted to swing by because something about their new cages caught my eye. Why not? It's closed anyway. No one's there. So, we get out and look around. I notice there's a green truck parked in the driveway. Shrug it off. This woman comes around the corner and asks us if we work there. Tell her no, but ask what she needs. She's interested in adopting a dog. She's been living in a different town 10 miles away for the last few months, and since she was in town today, she wanted to check this shelter. Her dog ran away about 10 months prior, so I tell her we have 2 available for adoption, a brindle and a beagle. She says her dog that ran away was a beagle. At this point, it might be exactly what you're thinking, and you're right. Somehow, some way, we'd end up with her beagle in our yard, and then coincidentally met her on a random day at a location I had never been to but had driven past almost every day. The brindle, it turned out, was his girlfriend from next door that would escape with him. Those neighbors had rented out their rent shortly before the woman had moved and were not nice people. So she took the beagle, her beagle, who had been missing for almost a year home. The final coincidence is that we named the beagle Bagel, and his original name? Brownie. Food names. A classmate of mine sent a fake email that looked totally legit to select members of my class saying that we had failed a really important exam which carries bad consequences for our career. After we freaked out, he let us know it was a joke, and when the results came out a week later, there was only one person who failed. My classmate who sent the fake email. I have 2. So first off, I met my oldest current friend when we were 14. When we were 17, we discovered we were born 3 hours apart. I demanded to see ID because I thought someone was playing a joke on me. Seriously, I made my friend show ID to prove it. It took us 3 years to figure that out. Secondly, I ran into my cousin in California at an airport. Neither of us were flying home. We hadn't even spoken in weeks, but we had layovers at the same time at terminals that were right next to one another in a different state. It was so freaking weird. We took a picture to prove it happened. I was best friends with this girl in preschool. After that, we didn't go to the same school, so we lost touch. Flash forward to my junior year in high school and I meet this girl. I'm walking her home one day and we passed that preschool. We both realized we went there and figured out that we were friends back then. We've now been together for 15 years and we'll finally be getting married in October for our 16th anniversary. For over a decade, I very rarely remembered any of my dreams. One night I had a very vivid dream that I was busted by the cops for drug possession and was sentenced to prison. The dream itself was agonizingly paced as if in real time. Days turned to weeks to months. The pain of losing everything and everyone in my life had sent me into a catatonic despair when all of a sudden I woke. I instinctually checked my phone only to find a ton of mixed texts, emails, and phone calls from a friend who was arrested for drugs that night while I slept and had been trying to get me to bail him out. I had recently graduated from a large state school and found a room in an empty house to rent. Since I was moving from my college apartment, I didn't have any furniture, and I decided to grab a dresser a previous occupant had left in the basement. It wasn't anything crazy looking, but it wasn't a basic mass-produced dresser IKEA either. Something a bit older, but not antique. 3 of my friends helped me move it upstairs while we were waiting for a fourth. The fourth friend arrived, walks into my room, and stares at my dresser for a long time before saying, "Why do you have my dresser?" It turns out her parents had donated her childhood dresser to Goodwill, and the previous occupant of the house was from the same tiny town she was and had gotten his dresser at that Goodwill.